Yo, what's going on, guys? Welcome back to a brand new video on the channel. Inside of today's video, we're going to be taking a look at the worst 10 brawlers in the meta right now. So it's been about a week since the update, so I felt like a few of these have actually changed because a lot of the more worst brawlers actually got a significant buff or like a small buff. So hopefully this has changed a little bit. Let me know what you think of it by the end of the video. Before we jump into it, of course, make sure you're using the creator code. That'd be greatly appreciated. Without further ado, let's jump right into it. Okay, so jumping into the 10th worst brawler in the game right now, I've gone for Gale. So Gale is a brawler which has always been in and around the top 20, I believe, and then with recent balance changes, I think they've just absolutely killed him. If I was being more brutally honest, I think he'll be near the bottom 5 brawlers in the game. Main reason being is because it feels like it doesn't even counter tanks anymore. That's how bad I think he is right now. Again, it'll probably take maybe another week for the meta to fully settle, but just from playing him myself, I just feel like he never gets super anymore, and still then I feel like tanks can actually fight back. So the big interaction change which I spoke about in previous videos is essentially before the balance changes, you could super someone against a wall, then use 2 pieces of ammo, and then you would get your super back, and then you could just basically stun lock them. Now you can't do that. You need an extra piece of ammo, and I just feel like now you're always like really far away from your super. Before, I felt like before you went into like an engagement, he was pretty close to super, maybe like a shot or something, and you can always like make a good play. So yeah, I feel like we've really killed Gale with these balance changes. Okay, so next up, as the 9th worst brawler within the game right now, we have a Jessie. So Jessie with an ladder is definitely pushable on like Brawl, for example, or a few hot zone maps, maybe even Heist. But I feel when it comes down to competitive, which I'm trying to base this list mainly on, there's not a single map in the rotation right now where I'd ever consider a Jessie. Maybe if like multiple tank counters were banned, I don't know, like Ems, Colette, Gale, etc., then maybe I could go with Jessie in hot zone, but still it takes a lot for me to even slightly consider this brawler. But should receive a little bit of a nice nerf with the turret HP going up, but I still feel like Jessie needs a lot more love to even become any part of the meta. So next up, as the 8th worst brawler within the game right now, we have Mr. P. So Mr. P did receive a small buff with the last set of balance changes, I believe around 100 extra damage, which doesn't seem like a lot. Hasn't really helped him out too much in the meta. It's just made him a little bit more viable. The reason why Mr. P is probably a little bit higher than some of these other brawlers is because of his mechanics, like just because he's pretty easy to use in multiple game modes and maps. I'm not saying he's like good in them, but at least he's somewhat usable. You know, you can't just use certain tanks or throwers, for example. But yeah, Mr. P getting a little bit better within the meta, but still his primary reason why I don't think he'll be anywhere near the top is because at long range it's just too easy to juke his shots. So next up, as the 7th worst brawler within the game right now, we have El Primo. So El Primo, again, a brawler which only really thrives when it comes down to countering tanks, did receive a small buff with the last set of balance changes, increasing his super damage. But again, this is only like a buff which may help him if he receives even more buffs, to get what I mean. But that one alone is really not going to do anything. You won't notice it really whatsoever. Maybe if you start cycling your supers, yeah, but it does take a long time for Primo to even get his super. And again, that's the main reason why he struggles in the meta. It takes so long to get his super, has very little range, just have one of the best supers in the game, though really hard to stop. You know, we've seen in the past when El Primo was meta, his super was so incredibly strong, made it hard to counter, but right now he doesn't have much of a place in the meta, maybe only in Brawl and Heist. Next up, as the 6th worst brawler within the meta, we have Frank. So Frank is a brawler which can definitely get some good usage out of him in some Brawl maps on ladder, but again, in competitive, there's never ever a reason to go Frank or even consider him. There's not a map in the game where I think, oh, maybe Frank could be usable. It used to be on Split where Frank actually could be somewhat of a decent pick, but of course that's not in competitive anymore. So maybe if they reintroduce a few maps, it might make him a little bit better. But just overall, I feel like there's a lot less riskier picks than Frank, because of course I feel like every brawler can get value against Frank, right? It's really hard for him to consistently, you know, get good supers, but overall he can still somewhat be a good niche pick, especially when it looks to countering some brawlers like Ash. So next up, as the 5th worst brawler within the meta right now, you guys are probably gonna hate me for saying this, Dynamike. I still think he's one of the worst brawlers within the game, but needless to say, I think he's definitely improved a lot in the meta. I just don't feel like the maps really suit him too much right now, but also I'd rather just go a different thrower on some game modes, you know, like where throwers are pretty dominant on. Bounty, and Knockout. I'd rather just go Grom, Sprout, Tick. All three of those brawlers I'd rather pick over Dynamike. Maybe even Barley sometimes as well, but maybe if all of those brawlers are banned, you might consider using Dynamike, but it definitely is a lot more usable and pushable in ladder, but still, it's kind of risky to go him on some Brawl maps because there's just so much mortis, but overall, it's definitely seen a big improvement. So next up, as the 4th worst brawler within the game right now, I've gone with a Barley. So Barley is a brawler which I think I put pretty much a lot higher in my last rankings, but I think as I've played a lot more ladder and just overall, again, competitive and Power League, I just feel like Barley hasn't really got too much of a place in the meta. I think the only time I see Barley being played is maybe as like a last pick in Super Beach and sometimes Sneaky Field, where actually he gets a bit more usage than Primo and Frank, but I just think overall in terms of sheer power, just Barley doesn't cut it for me. Again, all the other throwers, I'd even consider picking Dynamike over a Barley right now because Dynamike can just get insane damage pretty quickly. I just feel a lot of time people can just pick up, just pick on a Barley. Like, for example, even when he hard counters someone, I feel like if you make one misplay with Barley, you're just screwed. A lot of times those aggressive brawlers can just pick on him, as I said, unless you literally play him perfectly. If you play Barley perfectly, he can still be pretty strong in some circumstances. Overall, I don't think he gets enough value, and that's why he's near the bottom of the rankings. So next up, as the 3rd worst brawler within the game right now, I've gone with Brawl. So even though I love playing Brawl, one of my favorite brawlers to play, you can get some value out of him on ladder in Brawl. But again, I'm mainly basing this off competitive, and there's literally one map in the game I would even consider using him on, and that is Pit Stop. And still, I'd rather go other tanks in the game like Buster, like Daryl, even Sam right now, Primo. I'd probably rather go all of those brawlers rather than a Bull, but still, he might have that niche sometimes in Heist. You know, you can definitely push him in ladder on Heist as well, but overall, I just feel like he's incredibly weak, and a lot of the times in competitive, you can easily just keep your distance against the Bull. So next up, as the 2nd worst brawler within the game right now, we have Shelley. So no surprises here whatsoever. Shelley, the starter brawler, you know, all things considered, it's probably pretty fair for her to be near the bottom of the rankings, just because, of course, if she'll be strong, then she might be too strong for those new players joining the game. But overall, I feel like, of course, you can completely shut down tanks as is Shelley, but it's just very rare, especially in a Power League kind of format, that Shelley will really work unless you're literally facing off against 3 tanks. It's just never going to work. And still, you know, in ladder, it's just pretty hard unless you're literally facing a tank lane for you to actually win your matchup. Even if you're on like Sneaky Fields, for example, there's just so many brawlers and gadgets and supers in the game that break open walls as well, whereas Shelley really needs the grass and walls to really get a lot of pressure and value. Okay, so now jumping into the worst brawler within the game right now, I think it must be the longest worst brawler streak in the history of Brawl Stars, right? Edgar is still the worst brawler within the game, so nothing has changed about Edgar. So, you know, I'm hedging my bets 100% within the next month or so, surely Edgar has to get a rework. We didn't see any buffs to him with the last set of balance changes, so again, it just leads to think that they're going to rework Edgar. You know, Danny kind of hinted about it about 3 months ago or so, but it was pretty obvious they weren't going to rework him with World Finals so close. So now, surely they have a plan for Edgar, because it just doesn't get value in multiple matchups, right? It's very, very rare where a matchup will really work on him. I think the only matchup I could see him potentially working on is maybe on Pit Stop. You know, for example, you face off against a Barley and a Rico. That's probably the only time I would ever consider an Edgar. But yeah, hopefully in the future, he might be somewhat usable. All right, guys, it's going to be it for today's video. I hope you enjoyed this one. So let me know what you think of my bottom 10 ranking. It's pretty hard to be like really concise on this ranking because there's just so many different brawlers in the game right now. They all have like their own little niche. You know, in certain situations, some of these brawlers can be pretty strong, and if you're, of course, a really talented player, you can get a lot of value out of all of these brawlers, probably except for Edgar. So yeah, that's going to be it for today's video, guys. Hope you enjoyed it. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe, and I'll see you guys next time.